Teacher humiliated me in front of the Cla-s for not affording $10 clay. Now I'm struggling to return to her Cla-s. I'm enrolled in a figure sculpting class at my community college, and honestly, it's been a struggle from day one. I've never worked with clay before, never mind creating actual figures out of it, and good clay is expensive at the store my instructor recommended. The block was big and heavy, so I figured I wouldn't need to keep buying more. I always just smashed my sculptures when we finished. I didn't like them anyway. Every so often, my teacher, let's call her Mary, asked if I wanted to fire any pieces, which would harden them in a kiln. I always turned her down because I needed the clay from the failed attempts. I just couldn't afford new supplies. Mary kept insisting she had recycled clay and told me to save some of my work, but I resisted. Maybe that was stubborn, but I'm really tight on money these days. I work a job that barely pays above minimum wage, and they hardly give me enough hours. That job alone has been a massive source of stress. Mary and I just don't vibe. She hasn't taught this class before, and for someone like me, totally new to clay, her teaching style hasn't helped. She throws us right in with almost no foundational explanation, then gets visibly irritated when we inevitably have no idea what we're doing. When anyone asks for help, or even if nobody asks, she just swoops in, pushes you aside, and starts aggressively fixing your piece herself, ripping out sections, hacking at the clay, even smashing more clay onto your sculpture without asking. Compared to my figure drawing class, where the instructor just points with her finger to gesture where I should adjust things, Mary's hands-on, almost bulldozing, approach feels suffocating. And it isn't just that, she's got this way of talking to students that rubs everyone the wrong way. She gives people a hard time throughout the semester. Someone asks a genuine question, and she mocks them in front of everyone else. At one point, I had to sit because my clay was on a short table, and she launched into this rant about lazy artists and how sitting means you'll never make a good sculpture. She tried making my sculpting stand taller, but made it too tall, so I went back to sitting just to be able to work, only now she thinks I'm lazy. According to her, I should have shown up earlier to get a better stand. Little things like that have turned every class into a minefield. Today was a breaking point. Someone ran out of clay. Since Mary's always insisted she has recycled clay, nobody expected this to be an emergency. She gave the girl a really hard time, checked for more recycled clay, then came back and announced she was out. Do your other art classes not make you buy supplies? She snapped. Everyone said yes, so she scolded us that this was no different. We needed to be prepared, end of story. Except the bag of clay I bought was $20, a lot for me, and now I felt awful for the girl who had no clay to use. I went to get my own clay from my locker and discovered, to my absolute horror, that it had hardened. Over the weekend, I'd seen Mary help another student revive hardened clay before, so I swallowed my pride and asked her what I could do. She immediately got irritated. No, actually, she was furious. She started to say something nasty, stopped herself, then just began pacing. Are you guys adults? Like, are you? I'm done talking about your clay. Grow up, sort yourselves out. Go buy more clay, it's $10 at the bookstore. That floored me. First, I didn't know the bookstore even sold it cheaper. Second, I literally had no money for clay that week, flat zero in my account. Mary looked me straight in the eye and barked at me to go buy more. I asked her if she meant right now, and she just scowled and said, unless you're just planning to sit here doing nothing. I admitted, in front of the whole room, that I couldn't, I genuinely didn't have the money on me. She bent over, made this loud, dramatic frustrated noise, and kept pacing. I was mortified. It's not like I could have foreseen my clay hardening up and being useless. I apologized, barely holding it together, but then Mary decided to ask if the girl who had run out of clay and I could just share a new bag. Before I could respond, Mary announced she was going to front us the money and buy us some clay, then stormed out. Suddenly everyone was staring at me. I could feel my face burning up and my eyes filling with tears. Normally, I'd try to crack a joke in an awkward moment like that, but all I could blurt out was, great, I just had to admit to everyone that I don't have $10. Then I actually started crying. I just muttered something about leaving, packed up my stuff, and walked out. A few classmates tried to reassure me, said not to worry, that Mary was getting more clay, even offered to give me money themselves. That stung just as much, and I definitely didn't want Mary coming back to find me crying in front of everybody. So I bailed. On the walk home, I realized I'd abandoned my sculpting partner in the middle of class. We work in pairs sometimes, and I felt even worse. But I just couldn't handle being around Mary anymore. I definitely didn't want to accept anything from her, including a favor. I'd rather skip a day than feel indebted to her. The worst part is that I used to make good money at my last jobs, but I made the mistake of leaving a seasonal gig to find year-round work, and now I'm broke. I've pushed myself to keep working and attending classes, but it's a constant uphill battle, and after today, it just feels heavier. Now, I truly don't know what to do. I really don't want to face Mary again and pretend that nothing happened, but dropping the class now would mean wasting everything I've worked for so far. My fiancé gets paid tomorrow, and if I ask him for money, he'll cover me for new clay. I know that, but I already feel guilty leaning on him for bills as it is. I'm terrified of showing up next class with fresh clay, because I just know Mary will publicly accuse me of having lied about my financial situation. And the worst part? I need this class for my certificate, and as far as I know, she's the only one who teaches it. So what am I supposed to do now? Update 1. When I walked into that class for the first time, I had no idea how stressful a simple bag of clay could become. I found myself, for a handful of days, in the weird position of being completely out of money. Bills were paid, there was food on the table, I even had my apartment and my computer, but that was it, and that small gap between paychecks left me with nothing extra. I just assumed that, having survived adulthood thus far, I could ride it out for a few days. If I'd needed food or a bus ride, of course I would have asked for help. But a surprise $10 expense for clay in the middle of the month? That took me off guard. When I came to class that morning and discovered my clay was hard as a rock, I wasn't prepared for it at all. Up until then, I just kept it in my locker like everyone else. The outside sometimes felt a little stiff, sure, but I always managed by giving it a spray and kneading it until it was workable. I didn't realize there was a better technique or that my freshman habits were about to blow up in my face. So, with my chunk of permafrost clay, I turned to Mary, my teacher. She was right there, just finishing a demo. All I did was ask for advice on what to do with my hard clay. It wasn't some dramatic meltdown. Yet, from that small question, everything began unraveling. Her response, public, terse, and brimming with frustration, hit me hard. I felt tears forming before I knew what was happening. Being called out like that for not having $10 on hand, being treated as if my lack of psychic foresight or wealth marked me as a child, it stung. People can scoff at that tearful response, but until you're in that seat with everyone's eyes burning into you, you don't really know. To anyone who'd claim I'm not an adult because I didn't carry cash or was unprepared, if only you could see the real context. Life is paycheck to paycheck sometimes, and I'm doing what it takes to change that. My fiancé just got a better job. I'm looking for one, too. We're crawling out of it, and honestly, we're okay. If I wanted to go buy 5 bags of clay right now, I could. It just so happened that, for 3 or 4 days, I was flat out broke. Having everything covered except for one unexpected classroom debacle doesn't mean I'm not adulting. That clay debacle was, frankly, a storm in a teacup that left me questioning far too much. This was supposed to be a place to learn, to experiment, to get better, not where I'd be shamed for not having a pocket full of 20s at all times. Better yet, as many ceramicists have since pointed out, hard clay isn't some insurmountable problem. A decent teacher might show a student how to rehydrate the clay, or at the very least explain what to do next. Mary's response could have been a lesson. Instead, it became an ordeal. After class, feeling humiliated and frustrated, I turned to the department head and my major, someone I deeply trust. He gestured for me to talk privately, and I spilled the entire story. My voice shook, and I fought back tears, but he didn't dismiss me. He validated my frustration, saying outright that Mary's behavior was unprofessional and classless. In fact, he confided that my story confirmed what he already suspected about her teaching. He even gave me the inside scoop. The clay Mary uses for figure sculpture isn't even the right type. It's meant for ceramics, not the easier or more suitable stuff for human forms. When I asked what I should do, since I'd taken this class for the certificate he oversees, he laid my options out clearly. We'd find some other way to satisfy the requirements, or I could just wait until the department inevitably removed the class from her. His advice was firm: drop the class. When enrollments drop, the teacher gets scrutiny. They get questioned and evaluated, he explained. His point? If someone is unstable enough to treat students like this, they don't deserve my presence, my time, or my tuition. He said, fuck her, with every ounce of encouragement that statement needs. It made sense. For teachers at a community college, where students so often walk a financial tightrope, empathy is not optional. We're here, fighting for better futures, not for perfection. And I was told not to bother with a formal complaint. Unless a tidal wave of students comes forward, nothing substantial will change. If, though, he hears similar complaints, he'll yank the class from his certificate, which will hurt her. The majority of us were only there because of that requirement. When I got home, an email from Mary was waiting for me. Update 2. When I got home, the email from Mary had a subject line so stiff I could practically hear her jaw: materials and professional conduct. She thanked me, in the iciest way possible, for bringing the class to a halt, told me she had gone to the bookstore on her own time to purchase 2 bags of clay for me and the other student and that we now each owed her $20, cash, next class, no excuses. Then came a mini lecture about the expectations of adulthood in a studio environment, and a warning that walking out was unprofessional and grounds for failure. She closed with, please confirm that you intend to continue in this course so I can determine whether to assign your stand to someone more serious. I stared at it long enough for my tea to go cold. I don't know why, but that more serious line did it. I wrote back, careful and short. I told her I wouldn't be accepting the clay, that I'd left because I was overwhelmed after being singled out, and that I'd already spoken with the program head about withdrawing. I asked how to coordinate picking up my things. I CC'd him. He called me 10 minutes later and told me to come by in the morning. Do not reply to her again, he said. We'll take care of the certificate. You're fine. Before I could even set my phone down, my class group chat lit up. Someone sent a screenshot from the course page. Mary had posted a public announcement. Recent incidents have made it necessary to remind everyone that this is a college-level course with required materials. If you do not have $10 for Cla-s, reconsider your priorities. This is not high school. My name wasn't in it, but it didn't need to be. The timestamp was 10 minutes after she wrote to me. I felt that same hot, chest-tight flush from earlier and then just anger, clean and sharp like the edge of a new tool. The next morning, the program head walked me through a form I'd never seen before, petitioned to substitute a requirement, and pulled up a course list. He pointed to a 3D design class taught by an instructor I know and respect. "This will slot into your certificate," he said. "I'll sign it today. You'll get exactly what you need, and you won't have to set foot in that studio again." He also told me he'd already flagged the announcement to his dean. "We're putting an observer in her class," he said. "Let me handle it." I went to grab my stuff right then because I didn't want to walk into a room mid-class with everybody there. The lab tech was in the hallway unlocking the cage and asked if I needed help. He's one of those calm, always has a pocket knife and a zip tie somehow types who keep the whole place actually running, and when I said I was withdrawing, he nodded like he'd expected it. "You're not the first one this week," he said quietly, and handed me a cart. My locker was still propped open from when I'd fled. That stupid brick of clay sat there like a punchline. The tech peered at it and went, "Yeah, that's revivable." He sliced it into thick tiles with wire, stacked them like bread in a plastic bag, misted each layer, and showed me how to seal the bag tight. "Give it a couple of days and wedge it. It'll come back. No lecture. No performative size. Just a 5-minute, here's what you do." He handed me an extra trash bag to wrap around it like a raincoat. I could have cried from the simplicity of it. As I loaded my things, my phone buzzed again. It was the other student, the girl who'd run out of clay the same day I had. She asked if we could talk. We met outside the studio where the smokers usually gather, and she looked wrecked. Mary had walked in late, held up the bag she'd bought, and told her she wouldn't set it down until she put $20 on the table. She just stood there pinching the top of it like a hostage, the girl said, hollow laugh. I had to Venmo a friend during class. Then, apparently, Mary used that same bag to demo an armature build, tore it open, pulled out half the block with her hands, and what was left was streaked with plaster dust from the table because she hadn't wiped it down between demos. The girl said she still didn't have anything to work on by the end. 2 other students left, quietly, in the middle of all of it. One of them messaged me later and said, simply, "I dropped." On my way back through the hall, I passed the door and could hear Mary's voice through it, the exact tone you use with a dog that's chewed your shoe. For a second, I almost pushed in to say something on behalf of that girl, but the program head's words were right there in my ear. "Let me handle it." So I didn't. I took my ridiculous raincoat-wrapped clay and my tools and I left. My fiancé met me at a cafe down the block with a hot breakfast sandwich and the kind of hug that resets your spine. We walked to the community arts center 2 neighborhoods over because he'd looked up their open studio hours while I was with the head. The woman running it, a sculptor with clay under every fingernail and the softest voice, looked at my bag and laughed, not unkindly. "Oh honey," she said, and set up a space for me. She showed me how to wedge without overworking my wrists, how to keep a damp towel over pieces so they don't flash dry, how to pack a bag so it doesn't turn into a cinder block. She had me pinch out a little ear, just to remember what it feels like to actually make something. It wasn't good, but it was mine. Nobody grabbed it out of my hands. By afternoon, the substitution form was approved. The head emailed me a 1-line confirmation, "You're all set," and then a second email, this one forwarded, a request from Mary for an incident report on a student who abandoned her partner mid-class. She had CC'd him and copied some boilerplate from the student conduct page. He'd responded before I could even worry, telling her the matter was already being addressed, and future concerns about materials and professionalism should be routed through his office. That was it. No oxygen. I went home and put my clay in the corner like a little patient and, for the first time since this started, opened my sketchbook without my shoulders climbing to my ears. There's a slow kind of relief that comes when you realize you don't have to keep standing in a room where someone is determined to humiliate you. It doesn't make what happened okay. It just makes it smaller. And if I needed any more confirmation that walking away was the right thing, an hour later my phone lit up with a message from a classmate I barely talked to. She posted another announcement. "If you miss next class, you will fail the midterm sculpture. Half the class is talking about dropping." I don't know what will happen to that course. I'm not rooting for anyone to lose their job, that's not who I am, but I also won't pretend what happened in that room is normal. I will finish my certificate. I will learn to sculpt without someone's hands in my work. And in a few days, when my rain-coated brick softens and I can wedge it into something living again, I'm going to make a small figure, something just for me, and then I'm going to fire it. I'm not smashing anything anymore. Update 3. 2 days after I wrapped my clay like a burrito and swore off that studio, an email popped up from student conduct with the kind of neutral subject line that makes your stomach drop anyway, request for brief meeting. I was half expecting it after seeing Mary's incident report CC, but still. The woman I met with had a bowl of lifesavers on her desk and the exact face you make when your morning already has too many moving parts. She asked me to tell her what happened in my own words and I did, careful, factual. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she slid the bowl toward me. "For what it's worth, you aren't the only one I'm seeing this week," she said, not quite smiling. "You didn't do anything wrong by leaving a situation that was upsetting you. We're closing this on our end. Any further classroom issues will be handled by your department." It was brisk in the way a good haircut is brisk, efficient, tidy, no drama. I walked out and, for the first time in days, didn't feel like every door on campus might open onto an ambush. The group chat went off while I was still on the stairs. Someone wrote that there was a stranger sitting on the radiator in Mary's class, little notebook in hand, silent as a cat. The Observer. They said the room felt different from the first minute. People were whisper practicing their questions like they were about to audition for asking permission. About half an hour in, I got a grainy video filmed from a lap. You can't see much except the corner of a stand and Mary's elbow, but you can hear her. She's telling a student that the torso they're working on is beyond salvageable, and before she can reach in, a man's voice, one of the older students who always carried a thermos, says, calmly, "Please don't touch my piece." There's a beat where you hear nothing except the vent fan, then you hear her say, "Then why are you here?" And then a chair scrape, the thermos man standing up. In the video you catch a slice of him walking out, block of clay under his arm, and, after a breath, 2 more people's bags zipping. The Observer doesn't move. He writes something in the notebook. Mary doesn't speak for a full 30 seconds, and then she launches into a speech about rigor that sounds exhausted even on a second-hand video. I set my phone down and folded towels for my damp box because if I didn't keep my hands busy I was going to march over there and light myself on fire. The revived clay was ready, soft in the way that makes you forgive it. I wedged until it stopped feeling streaky and made a little standing figure, 8 inches high at most, no details, just weight and gesture. It's strange, when you stop building against someone else's hands, how quickly your own find their way back. I hollowed it like the woman at the Community Arts Center showed me, cut in half at the shoulders, scooped the belly, scored and slipped, pressed it back together so the seam wasn't a scar. It held. It felt like keeping a promise to a younger version of me. That afternoon, the program head called me, no preamble. "Her access to the course page has been suspended," he said. "An interim is stepping in tomorrow." It hit me then that the Observer's little notebook wasn't a theater prop, something actually happens after the writing. He told me, gently, not to repeat what he said outside of who I already tell everything to, my fiancée, my mom, the cat, but they'd received enough corroboration that they could act midterm. Students would be offered a grading contract that forgives the chaos and an option to transfer or continue. "We never want this to be what school feels like," he said, and his voice was rough in a way that made me picture him rubbing his forehead in his office. I asked about the girl with the hostage clay. He paused. "We're making sure she gets new material and studio time." That was enough. Mary, for her part, tried a last little flare before the lights went out. One of my old classmates forwarded a message that pinged everyone's inbox about an hour after the head called me, one of those digestion emails you get when the LMS has posted 5 things at once. The posts all had the same timestamp and then immediately disappeared, replaced with content not available. But the email preserved them in amber. The first was a lecture on professional decorum. The second was a directive that their midterm sculptures would now be required to be rendered in detail to the fingernail. The third was a note that students who had contributed to disruption should expect to discuss their futures at this college with her. They read like someone flinging dishes out a window as the moving truck pulls away. The interim instructor's introduction landed 10 minutes later like rain after static. "Hi all, I'm Aaron. I'm available before and after class. Let's focus on structure and stability this week." No capital letters. No metaphors about adulthood. Just clay. I brought my little figure to the Community Arts Center for the bisque with my mouth trying very hard not to smile, and the kiln tech took it from me like a nurse taking a newborn. "Greenware?" she asked. When I nodded, she tapped the belly with her nail. "Sounds right. There's a sound green clay makes when it's exactly the dryness it should be, barely a click, mostly a thud." I stood by the kiln longer than I needed to after she loaded it, listening to the slow click of the relays, the heat coming up. It's ridiculous to love an appliance. I don't care. When I came back 2 days later, she set my piece in my hands warm as bread. No cracks. Pale and quiet. I put it on the passenger seat like a person and drove home too carefully, the way you do when you've got a cake in the back. The 3D design class I swapped into started like a palate cleanser. The instructor walked in with a bag of binder clips and some chipboard and asked us to build a bridge that could hold a brick. We failed a bunch and then we didn't, and at no point did anyone sneer at anyone else for sitting or standing. I went home and, because I could, set up a small space by the window with a cheap turntable and my clay under its raincoat. There's a rhythm to keeping it happy, mist, bag, tuck, pat, that reminds me of how I water my snake plant, how routines can be the softest kind of rescue. I made a second small figure, this time with a hand half lifted like it's about to wave. It's silly. It's mine. There was one more knot to untie. A week after I dropped, I found an envelope tucked under my door with the college's return address and, inside, a typed note informing me that I owed $20. Oh, clay. It wasn't a bill from the bursar, it was a photocopied memo on letterhead with a signature I recognized drawn like barbed wire. I took a picture and sent it to the head. He replied with a period, then a second email. Handled. I don't know what that means in administrator speak, but no one has knocked since, and if anyone else gets one of those, the dean is going to have a new paperweight. On Friday night, my fiancé and I walked by the big windows of the sculpture room because he wanted to see if he could spot the interim wrangling a bunch of weary students into something that felt like a class. From the sidewalk, with the reflection of streetlights making halos out of everything, I could see the lab tech moving through the room like he always does, quiet, knife in pocket, zip ties somewhere. Aaron stood up front with a wire hoop and a block you could actually see over. People's shoulders were down. Somebody laughed. It was faint over the glass, but you can tell when laughter is relief and when it's mean. This was the first kind. When we got home, I put my bisque-fired figure on the bookcase where the weird objects live, souvenir rocks, a ceramic bird my grandma made, a single wooden chess pawn that doesn't belong to our set. It looks small and brave between the bird and the pawn. I'm going to take it back to the studio this week and give it a wash and a second firing, nothing fancy. A friend from Figure Drawing says the Arts Center is doing a members show in a month, and if you bring something, they put it on a shelf with your name under it in crooked plastic label tape. I don't care if it's the shelf by the bathroom. I just want to see it out in the world, not under my heel. Update 4. I took my little figure back to the Community Arts Center with a half cup of watered down burnt umber and a brush I found in the bottom of my tote that had one hair that stuck out like a question mark. The woman with clay under every fingernail taught me how to give it a wash, thin the pigment until it looked like tea nobody wanted, paint it on, then wipe it back so it settles in the low places and doesn't shout. Don't polish it, she said, just let it take. We set it on a ware board with 5 other small, stubborn things and slid it into the glaze kiln. There is a particular piece in standing next to a machine that makes light from heat. I went to the bulletin board and filled out the members show card with my crooked block letters, title, price if any, name for the tape label. I wrote standing, then scratched it out and wrote listening, like it had been doing for me, and left the price blank because money still felt like an argument even on a shelf. On the way out I saw a flyer thumbtacked over an old Tai Chi schedule, studio monitor wanted, evenings, must know where the mop lives. I took a picture without thinking why. On campus, my inbox bloomed with subject lines like seedlings. One from the dean's office was shaped like a press release. The figure sculpting course would continue under interim instruction with adjusted expectations and material support. There would be a one-time distribution of clay to enrolled students, purchased out of instructional contingency funds, and the bookstore had been asked to hold any charges related to the class pending review. There was also a sentence that was both brutal and polite. The previous instructor will not be teaching while we evaluate classroom climate. It didn't say leave. It didn't say fired. It was the quiet click of a door that had been open too long. A second email from the department was less formal. It just said, if you were told you owed an instructor money directly, you do not. Please do not pay. It felt like someone finally turned off a strobe. The lab tech caught me by the vending machines that smell like old sugar and dryer lint. He asked, in the way you ask if someone wants to split a sandwich, if I could cover a couple of evening open studio hours because the regular monitor had a gig. You wedge without complaining, he said, which I'm pretty sure is his version of a recommendation letter. 10 hours a week, minimum. Keys if I didn't lose things. Tape on the light switches that stick. The pay isn't amazing, but it's more than my cafe shift, and the idea of buying clay without having to do math in the toothpaste all made my chest float. He handed me a ring with 3 mismatched keys and said, do not let anyone use the good broom on slip. I promised like I was getting sworn in. The members show installed like a potluck. Rows of wire shelves pushed up along white walls that could use repainting, everything tagged in label tape that sometimes peeled up at the edges so the names curled like they were shy. My little person ended up on, hilariously, the shelf by the bathroom. The room smelled like kiln wash and coffee. During the opening, a small boy in a dinosaur hoodie reached out fast, the way small boys do, and his mother put a hand on his shoulder with exactly the force of a prayer. We look with our eyes, she whispered, and then she bent down and looked with her eyes. He's listening, she read, and the boy nodded like he'd heard that, too. An older man with paint on his knuckles stood in front of it for a long time and then wrote my name down on the back of a postcard. He didn't buy it. He didn't have to. Somebody's name in a stranger's pocket is enough to get through an afternoon. Mary tried to make a last door where there wasn't one. It was an email from a Hotmail address with a name that tried to be a company, Studio Accounts. It said, outstanding balance, $20. Oh, Clay, and then, failure to remit will result in academic hold. The font was wrong, and the signature line included her personal website and a quote about excellence. I sent it to the program head without any words. He called me, not because he needed to, but because you call people when things are gross. You don't owe her anything, he said. Do not reply. By late afternoon, an HR person whose emails always feel like they're written with a ruler sent a message to a list that included me by CC accident and also to legal and also to someone named VP Ops, politely reminding a former instructor that contacting students directly about money is not just contrary to policy, it is a violation that can affect employment status and academic freedom determinations. There was a sentence about cease and desist, a phrase that looks like it wants to be wearing sunglasses. I made pasta and salted the water until it tasted like the ocean and didn't think about her any more than you think about weather that already passed. When I went in to monitor, the studio was a kind of quiet you don't get unless people feel safe. Aaron had taped butcher paper to the demo table to keep the plaster from kissing everything, and he was showing 3 students how to run a wire through a neck seam without decapitating the whole thing. He nodded at me like we were co-conspirators. The thermos man was back, by the window, building a torso like a stack of breath. The other student, the one who had to Venmo a friend while a bag of clay was held at eye level, sat across from me and did not make eye contact for the first 10 minutes, the way you don't touch a bruise to see if it still hurts. Then she asked me how I revived my brick, and I told her about the bag, the misting, the raincoat, the patience. I said it like a recipe, no sermon, and she wrote it in her notebook with an asterisk like it was a spell. I handed a kid a plastic bag, showed another how to tilt a stand so your back doesn't yowl, told someone to put a towel over their piece if they were going to lunch. I took somebody's chunk and cut it into tiles with the wire. The cut squeak is its own kind of music, and for the first time, nobody grabbed the thing I was trying to make and jammed their hands into it. If I had known all I needed to not be poor at sculpture was a key on a ring and the authority to say don't use the good broom, I could have saved myself a few gray hairs. The kiln gods took my little listening person and gave it back without cracks. I rubbed a little band of iron wash into the collarbones and around the lifted hand so it looked like it had come up through something. When I set it back on the shelf for the opening, there was a blue painter's tape dot under it I didn't put there. The woman with the clay fingernails winked. Means someone asked about it, she said. You okay if it leaves you? I looked at the crooked label with my name on it and thought about how some things leaving are a relief and some things leaving are a second heartbeat. I wrote a number on the card that felt like it might insult the work or me or the person buying it, and before I could finish the thought, the man with paint on his knuckles turned the card over and wrote a check with a fountain pen like he was in a movie. My wife will put it by the kettle, he said. She listens when she makes tea. I wrapped it in tissue and wished, briefly and without rancor, that all debts came like that, wrapped carefully and handed over on purpose. 2 days later, the campus newspaper ran a piece that was trying hard to be gentle and failed in exactly the way it should have. Figure sculpting course under interim instruction after climate concerns, with quotes around climate like it had teeth. There were no names, just students and one instructor, and a picture of Aaron's hands hovering over an armature in a way that looked like prayer. A paragraph at the bottom mentioned a pilot materials grant for studio arts, small but real, and a one-line thank you to the lab technicians who keep our wheels spinning, which made me laugh out loud because if anyone ever deserved a stipend and a crown, it's the guy with the pocket knife and the zip ties. He walked by my desk that night and flicked my light switch twice, the way you do at the end of a show, and said, "You see the paper?" I held it up. He shrugged like that newspaper had been expected since September. "Find the mop?" he asked. I saluted with it. We stood for a second listening to the exhaust fan and the soft wet sounds of clay being persuaded into knowing itself. I'm not naive enough to think a blue dot and a newspaper paragraph fix everything. I can still feel the hot wash of humiliation if I let myself play the tape back. But every time I hand someone a trash bag and say, wrap it up like a raincoat, and they look relieved instead of small, it gets a little quieter in my ribs. Last night, before I turned the lights off, I slid a piece of label tape under the good broom. I wrote for dry sweeping only in letters big enough that even the saints could read them. It's not a policy. It's not a lawsuit. It's the tiny joy of making a room work the way it should. When I locked the cage, the keys clicked like a yes.